From inside a hotel room in Dallas, it is the Banner Baseball Show as my voice cracks. Paul Mancano and Danielle Allentuck live at the baseball winter meetings. Danielle, we have a lot to talk about here on today's show. We went live just a few days ago on Saturday night, and we have another signing to talk about. That is the reported deal of Gary Sánchez, backup catcher, coming to the Orioles. We've also heard from Mike Elias. He didn't talk about Tyler O'Neill or Gary Sánchez, but he gave us kind of a sneak peek into what the Orioles have up their sleeves this offseason. So we're going to talk about that. But Danielle, a couple days now into winter meetings, a whole lot of chit chat. Let me tell you, like 85% of this is standing around and talking. I know that sounds like our jobs are ridiculous and easy, and our editors actually pay for us to go to these things, but it is important. You do learn a lot by standing and talking in the lobby.
It's true. I mean, I took like 14,000 steps yesterday. I only left the hotel once. So
there we go.
A lot of going back and forth in the same area. He actually said this 15 minutes later than he told me.
Yes.
Because he knew I was going to be late because I would get stuck talking to somebody.
Exactly. And, those 15,000 steps for me, too, allowed me to work off my, $17 tuna wrap that it cost in the hotel bar. Don't you just love that?
Yeah.
We love just coming to winter meetings and getting gouged price-wise. Danielle, let's talk about what we've learned from Mike Elias so far, because we met in his hotel suite yesterday, and the focus, as has been the case for the last several off seasons, is on pitching. Mike Elias did say that the Orioles feel good about where their rotation is starting right now, the place that they're in, but they are always looking to upgrade, and they should be. We've talked about it a million times. They have two guys coming back from injury that won't be ready until midseason, and Tyler Wells and Kyle Bradish. They could be relying on young guys like Cade Povich and Chase McDermott and Brandon Young. They're relying on veterans that they got more out of than they expected last year in Albert Suarez. So they need some kind of stability. And Elias said he's not partial to any type of pitcher, whether it's an ace or an innings eater. They're just looking to add somebody to this rotation.
Yeah, and I think the difference with the team right now going into the season is on paper, they have enough starters to get through the season. They have Eflin, they have Rodriguez, they have Kramer, Suarez, Povich, McDermott, Brandon Young, their minor league pitcher of the year, Tyler Wells, and Kyle Bradish at some point should be back next year.
Right.
But on paper only means so much. I asked Elias yesterday, I said, do you want an ace, or are you really going to take a step back? And he said he likes where they're starting from, and he's looking at all things. He says they're shopping in that top market right now, and they're going to continue to do that. They're not afraid of that. They're not afraid, he said, to make a major leaguer for major leaguer trade, if that's what it takes to get an ace. He kind of gave himself kudos yesterday for the Corbin Burnes trade. He was like, look what I did last year. I got an ace.
Not all 30 teams can do that.
That was his exact line, yes.
Yeah, which is fair. I mean, that they got the best guy that was on the market via trade last year.
And so he said, that could be an option again as well. Maybe free agency isn't the way to go, but, maybe we part with a major leaguer and go get another major leaguer that we need to help this rotation.
Yeah. And there are a lot of different types of pitchers out there. It's really kind of a pick your favorite flavor. There are guys that have maybe higher upside, but more injury concerns like Justin Verlander and Max Scherzer. And then there are the bulk inning guys like you might expect, and Sean Manaea, who's probably a number 2, maybe a number 1 in a rotation, and also has shown that he, can eat a good amount of innings as well. Andrew Heaney, an interesting lefty out there. The interesting comment as well from Elias was about qualifying offers, because there was a report about a week ago that the Orioles were being careful not to delve into the market of pitchers who have been offered qualifying offers because they are attached to draft pick compensation. So for the same reason the Orioles extended qualifying offers to Corbin Burnes and Anthony Santander, both of them turned those down, the Orioles will get draft pick compensation if and when both those guys leave in free agency. So the Orioles love their draft picks, but Mike Elias said we are in on everybody. They are not necessarily ruling guys out just because they have that draft pick compensation attached to them.
Yeah, and I was surprised by that answer that he gave me yesterday, because, they do love their draft picks. It's how they built this team. It's how they are where they are. But you look at the other side, they're probably not getting Santander. They have Tyler O'Neill. They don't need another outfielder right now. And I think he's probably, he didn't say it, but, we haven't heard much about them being in on Burnes either. So that's 2 potential draft picks they could be getting back. They could lose 1 if they sign somebody like Max Fried, but you still ended up with 1 extra.
Right.
So, the math still works out a little bit.
Yeah. It stinks that Colton Cowser didn't win Rookie of the Year because that would have been draft pick.
Yeah.
But this team has also shown that they are willing to trade draft picks. Of course, draft picks are hard to trade because only really the competitive balance round picks can be traded. Can't like trade your first round pick. But they dealt one of their competitive balance round picks in the Corbin Burnes trade. That was, I wouldn't say a throw-in because that's a valuable asset, but it was the last piece along with Joey Ortiz and DL Hall that they threw to the Brewers to get Corbin Burnes. So they've shown that they are willing to part with those draft picks if it means getting a premier talent. It's just, is that pitcher talented enough to get it? I think Max Fried is somebody who's offered a qualifying offer from the Atlanta Braves. He looks like an ace starting pitcher. That guy would probably be worth it. But if it's somebody like Nick Pivetta, who has been more of a middle of the rotation guy for the Boston Red Sox and got the qualifying offer and rejected it this offseason, that might give you a little bit more reason to pause because he's not going to be an ace for you. And if it comes with a big contract and a draft pick, there's a reason to maybe stay away from that kind of guy.
And, the other side of this is Elias and we're out getting more than one starter.
Yeah.
I mean, the past couple of years, he's only gone out and gotten one in free agency or trade. But this year, he said, he's not making a guarantee he's going to get more than one. But it felt like kind of shift in tone there where he was like, I am willing to go out and get more than one if more than one deal works out for them.
Yeah. Also interesting, he was asked about the bullpen because they parted ways with two relievers who ate up a good amount of innings last year, Danny Coulombe and Jacob Webb. Obviously, Coulombe didn't eat as many innings because he spent some time on the injured list. But Jacob Webb was solid for them in their bullpen as well. He kept the door open, Elias did, for the return of both those guys because Jacob Webb was non-tendered. Danny Coulombe had his option not picked up, but both those guys are still out there. In talking to John Mioli on the Banner Baseball Show about a week ago, we were talking about how Elias likes to build this bullpen, and it's optionable guys.
Right.
And the fact that all these guys are getting older and they're losing their option years means that perhaps Elias might try to acquire somebody via trade who has options instead of signing somebody. Because if you sign them to a free agent contract, you can't just option them down to the minors. So having somebody who has options gives them more flexibility.
And Elias hasn't outright said this, but they do have those young pitching prospects.
Right.
If they go out and get 1 to 2 more starters, their rotation is filled.
Right.
So you could have a guy like Cade Povich, Chase McDermott, Brandon Young, go into your bullpen. All 3 of those guys have options.
Yeah.
And I could easily fill the roles that Danny Coulombe and Jacob Webb left. And, a lot of them don't have yet experience in a bullpen, but it's not uncommon for a AAA starter to come up to the majors and be a reliever.
Yeah. And you could kind of squint and look at the end of the season rotation and see a rotation that has Tyler Wells and Kyle Bradish back in there, has Zach Eflin in there for a full season, and Grayson Rodriguez.
Tyler Wells could come back as a reliever as well.
Right. So, and then you think about all that depth that you can then use in the bullpen. And that is an exciting proposition. It's just getting to the start of the season and getting through the early months in April and May where you're still waiting for those guys to come back and you need somebody who is more reliable than rookie, Chase McDermott or Brandon Young. You just would like to have somebody who has a little bit more experience to throw out there.
And Elias also loves his low-level trades to get relievers. I mean, that's how Danny Coulombe got there, catch considerations. Jacob Webb was a reliever pickup. They could easily replenish the bullpen by doing both of those things in spring training.
Exactly. All right. Let's talk about the signing of Gary Sánchez, which Elias did not comment on because it is not official. Still waiting on physicals from Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez. However, the Orioles got their backup catcher, signed him to a 1-year, $8.5 million deal, reportedly. Of course, Orioles fans are familiar with him because he's torched the Orioles over his career. 7 seasons with the Yankees, had 2 All-Star appearances in 2017-19, ended up getting traded to Minnesota in the Josh Donaldson, Gio Urshela deal. His offensive production started to dip from there. Batting average starts to go down, and then has a series of journeyman stints. Ends up in New York at one point with the Mets after he was picked up on waivers, then San Diego. Last offseason signed a $3 million deal with Milwaukee, had an $11 million mutual option that was declined by Milwaukee this year. Hit 220, 11 homers, 699 OPS, 93 OPS plus. Very similar statistics offensively to James McCann last year. Played in more games, but fewer games at catcher. 72 career games against the Orioles, 22 homers, 915 OPS. He, at one point, was one of the best young hitting catchers in all of baseball. Things started to drop off from there. But the Orioles clearly like the pop that he can bring to this lineup.
Yeah, I mean, you're exactly right. He's a little bit better than James McCann.
Yeah.
And that's what you're getting.
And he's 2 years younger.
It's what you're paying for from him. But it is a backup catcher. Elias gave a really interesting answer yesterday when he was asked, what can you expect the split to be between Rutschman and Sanchez, or any theoretical backup catcher, since he won't comment on Sanchez yet until his physical is done. And he said, look at how, they split it the past 2.5 years with Adley up. And he said, I expect it to continue like that.
Right.
So a split of Adley catching about half the games and then DHing for maybe about the other half is about what we can expect. But it's not necessarily what we've seen from Gary Sanchez over the last couple of years.
Yeah. In talking about that split, he did reference the last couple of years, and he said we have now 2 years and 75% of another season of Adley Rutschman. That's a good sample size that we're going to go by, and that shows just where he's comfortable in his playing time, where we're comfortable in his playing time. So that means of the 415 games that Adley's played in his career, he's been behind the plate in 306 of them. So that's about 74% of games. Obviously, he's DH'd the rest of the games or come in as a pinch hitter as well. So the Orioles are not going to be catching him a whole lot less just because they have Gary Sanchez now. If he's fully healthy, Adley's going to play about 150 games. He's going to catch about 105 of those, and Gary Sanchez is going to come in. But what I do like is Gary Sanchez is just a more proven hitter right now than James McCann, 2 years younger. I just think that I feel better about him being in the lineup than I do about James McCann. We saw those 2 playoff at-bats for James McCann. They did not go well. Who's to say that you put Gary Sanchez in those 2 at-bats against the Royals and he does any better? He does strike out a whole lot, but he walks a good amount, and James McCann did not. His walk percentage is almost double that of James McCann's for his career. We saw that about Tyler O'Neill, part of the reason that we think the Orioles targeted him. Of course, we haven't heard from Elias on him, but the Orioles want to get somebody who's on base, who can hit a little bit more pop, and somebody that obviously they feel comfortable with throwing behind the plate when Adley's getting a day off.
And the other side of this is, you have to look at the signing. It's remembering it's a backup catcher.
Right.
This guy is not your starter. You're not relying on him in big spots necessarily. He is to back up Adley Rutschman, and he's essentially a place filler.
Yeah.
They're trying to get production out of the backup catcher spot for 1 year until Samuel Basallo is ready to come up and take over.
Right.
They still see Samuel Basallo as a catcher in the future. I think he'll probably end up DHing a lot more than catching early on in his career. They love that guy's bat. They are so high on him. He's still only 20 years old. Made it to AAA last year. I would expect him to have most of next season in AAA and then come up maybe towards the end of the season or 2026 and take over that backup catcher spot.
Yeah.
So this was an expensive ad, $8.5 million, I believe it was, for Sanchez. That's expensive for a backup catcher, but there weren't that many quality options out there.
Yeah.
So if you're trying to get production from that spot, you have to pay for it.
I wrote about on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months, about 4 backup catchers that the Orioles could sign. And I didn't include Gary Sanchez only because he has been available the last couple off seasons, especially the offseason where they got James McCann, and the Orioles didn't bite. I heard they were interested, but ultimately he signed with other teams. So I figured maybe the Orioles were not in on him. How did he go from getting a $3 million contract last offseason to an $8.5 million contract this offseason when he had less WAR, according to Baseball Reference, than James McCann? OPS plus was under 100, maybe he's a below average hitter. I think you have to pay more for a backup to Adley Rutschman, because other places, if they sign Gary Sanchez, he might have a legitimate chance to start a lot of games. He comes to Baltimore knowing he's not going to start most games. He is going to be Adley's backup, and that's a hard thing to get a player to sign to agree to. And so maybe you have to overpay him just a little bit in order to get him in-house. And the difference between, $5.5 million, it's really not a huge difference. In free agency, you tend to have to overpay for guys. That's how it works. And $8.5 million isn't an exorbitant fee.
It's a player's market.
Yeah.
I mean, free agents are expensive right now. And I think they're only going to continue to get more expensive, as baseball goes on. I mean, look how much Han Soto costs, $750 million. So in hindsight, a lot cheaper than that.
Yep.
But I just think a lot cheaper, obviously.
Yeah, 1/100th, roughly.
But free agents are just expensive. And like I said earlier, you are paying to get that quality backup catcher there.
Yeah, and quite frankly, Adley Rutschman, we've talked about his second half struggles. He just needs to play better in the second half. He needs to play more like the first half Adley Rutschman next year. and they'll get more production out of that spot. That was part of the reason his struggles, part of the reason that they had James McCann in the lineup in that game 1 against the Royals. Hopefully we're not in a situation where, Adley Rutschman is DHing in that game. Hopefully we're in a situation where he's catching and he's more productive at the plate. All right. More thoughts on Tyler O'Neill, because I was thinking about this over the last couple days. We may have, when we spoke the other night, discounted a little bit his injury concerns. We mentioned them. You said, name a body part. He's hit the injured list with that kind of injury. His injury concerns are certainly, a cause for pause. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's the reason that he was really only able to get a 3-year deal that averaged $16.5 million a year, which is not a ridiculous amount for somebody who hit 31 homers in 113 games. There's a legitimate reason to be worried about him staying on the field. And if he's injured a lot of this year, if he's not productive a lot of this year, he is probably going to just pick up his option for the next 2 years, because there's an opt-out after this season, and stick on the team for 2026 and 2027 at $16.5 million a year. That's still not ridiculous of a cost for 3 years. That is acceptable for a corner outfielder. But still, ideally, he hits the cover off the ball, he stays healthy. And honestly, you'd love to have him back, but if he does that, he's opting out and hitting free agency. That's still the best case scenario, because you got one great year of a power hitting corner outfielder for $16.5 million.
Yeah, I do very much look forward to asking Elias about the injury concerns and how much that played into this once they do complete those physicals, which are not done yet. So the deal is not official yet. But as soon as that is, I do look forward to asking Elias, how much they took that into consideration and how much that went into the price of how much he costs. Because you're right, it's not that expensive.
Right. If
he goes out and hits 30 home runs again next year, you're getting a good deal out of him.
Yeah.
Especially losing Anthony Santander, who's going to cost a lot more money than that, probably upwards of 25 million a year. But you having a guy who maybe he has an off season next year, but then he picks it up again the next 2 years, that's still valuable for them.
Yeah.
Because they could be losing Cedric Mullins.
Yep.
And there's not a ton of outfield prospects in the wings anymore. They don't have this huge AAA stack to pull from like they did at the start of last season. So having a little bit of security there, even if it's not his best season, could still be in their favor.
Yeah, Cedric Mullins entering his walk year. You have Heston Kjerstad, who they're hoping will take a step forward this year and maybe platoon a little bit with Tyler O'Neill. Colton Cowser obviously entrenched in that outfield. But if Tyler O'Neill walks next year, opts out, if Cedric Mullins walks in free agency, you're talking about replacing 2 starting outfielders. Heston Kjerstad, if he performs as this team expects him to, could be your starter in right field in 2026. Yeah. But you don't really have too many options, like you said. Enrique Bradfield Jr. is in Double-A. He's got incredible speed. He's got incredible defense. He's never going to hit for power, and he's going to walk a lot, but that batting average may not be near 300. And then you've got Vance Honeycutt, who they just drafted with their first-round pick, who is a ways away. Just finished the 2024 season with High A Aberdeen. They like what they've seen from him, but he's not going to be ready in 2026, I don't think.
Yeah, Enrique Bradfield Jr., he's going to be a starting center fielder in the majors. He's going to be batting 8th or 9th in your lineup, probably. Right. He's going to steal a ton of bases. He's going to play great defense, maybe win a Gold Glove, but
Michael A. Taylor type.
Yeah, you're never going to get that pop from him. And they knew that when they drafted him.
Yeah.
I think it's okay to have one guy in your lineup like that. The other end of this is they have floated the idea of putting Kobe Mayo in the outfield and teaching him that. They haven't started that process yet, but they did talk about that at the end of last season. So maybe if there's not a place for him at first or third base, that could be an option as well.
Yeah, you just wonder, would he be able? The left field's smaller than it is. It's going to be smaller than it was last year, but would he be able to handle that much ground?
Well, Heston Kjerstad played a little left last year as well.
He certainly did.
He could, he got a little better at the outfield. He could go in that spot too.
The results were kind of mixed, but
he did have a concussion.
Yes, he did.
Yeah, that one bad play he made the day Austin Hayes was traded.
Yeah.
He couldn't see the ball.
That was tough. Yeah.
That wasn't necessarily on him. I think he should get a clean slate erased for that one.
Absolutely. And Mayo has got a great arm. The Orioles have trotted out worse guys out there defensively in the outfield than that group.
If you're getting a bat out of him,
right?
Does that make up for maybe a little lesser defense from him?
Yeah, that's an option. You also have Dylan Beavers, Judd Fabian, who are in the system. Beavers, as our housekeeping knocks on the door. Dylan Beavers is somebody who was drafted with the 2nd round pick, and I think could be in the big leagues at some point, but I don't think he has a path to being a everyday starter in the outfield like, some other top prospects. Danielle, you and I have a bad history of getting interrupted during podcasts. But I will, next time I got to put the privacy please on the door. And then Judd Fabian is somebody who is another guy who was drafted with a, third, fourth round pick. He was their third or fourth round pick of that draft. And again, might be a big leaguer at some point, but it's not like you clear the path for a Judd Fabian and you can go into a season saying this guy's definitely going to be a starter in our outfield.
Yeah, and I mean, you never know either. You have the midseason deadline if things come up. The other end of this is if they're going to make a major league for major league trade to get a starting pitcher, who's part of that trade? I was, proposing that maybe Heston Kjerstad is part of that trade. And I know that doesn't help them out in the future, but it helps them out in the present because you have Jorge Mateo and Ryan O'Hearn who can play in right field if needed, and play some outfield for them. So, that's also part of this consideration.
Yeah. We might be seeing some more Jorge Mateo in the outfield next year as another right-handed option, especially if Tyler O'Neill goes down at any point during the season.
I would expect it, even if he doesn't go down.
Yeah. All right. Let's talk about overall what we've kind of learned about this team through the first month of free agency of the offseason. Still got 2 months to go before spring training. Still plenty of time, still plenty of runway, and still plenty of guys that are out there in free agency. Orioles have yet to sign somebody to a guaranteed multi-year deal. I guess you could say Tyler O'Neill's contract is guaranteed for multi-years.
It's a loophole.
Yeah,
it's like a half step in that direction.
It is. Yeah. I mean, the headline is Elias signs first guy to multi-year contract. But then you realize Tyler O'Neill, if he has a good year, could just opt out and hit free agency, and that's no longer.
But they are willing to front the money.
Yes.
If he doesn't take that option.
Yes.
So loophole.
They're making a commitment to somebody. You have to be okay with him picking up his option and being with the team for 3 seasons. So technically, that would be a multi-year deal. However, we just haven't seen them shell out a multi-year contract that is, has no loopholes. And I think we were going into this offseason, Danielle, you and I had expectations that the Orioles under David Rubenstein might increase their payroll, but they have never said explicitly, we're going to go out there and make a splash. We're going to go out there and spend a ton of cash, like the John Middleton comment years ago, we're going to spend stupid money. They've always been careful about saying we're going to spend money in order to get this team competitive, but we're going to be judicious about it. And I think that's why, to me, so far, this offseason has gone pretty much how I expected it to go so far.
Yeah, I mean, David Rubenstein's exact line was, I'm probably going to have to spend money to make the team better.
He didn't even say more money. He just said, probably going to have to spend money.
Yeah. And I mean, it's true. You do have to spend money. So far, in my mind, the O'Neill deal just kind of replaces what they were paying Corbin Burns last year.
Right.
So it's not necessarily an increase in payroll. Sanchez is less than Kimbrel cost. So they're kind of about the same, even with the guys who are going to go up in arbitration. But the offseason's still early. Elias does not usually feel a lot of pressure to make deals at the winter meetings. It's kind of been his thing that he doesn't make a ton of moves during this week. But last year, they made their best trade of the offseason right before spring training.
Yeah, February 1st. Yeah.
So, they have plenty of time to get those other pieces. And maybe, as it gets closer to spring training, teams start getting more desperate. Players start getting more desperate, and they can make those better deals. So I don't think you can really evaluate how Rubenstein's first offseason is going until the offseason is complete.
Right.
Because we're only at the halfway point to spring training right now. So there's still a month and a half left for these deals to get done and these trades to be made.
Yeah. And Elias is just not going to be, I don't think I can ever imagine him being a GM who is going to spend lavishly.
No. It's against his policy, basically.
Yeah. He is going to find deals that make sense for his team. He's going to find ways to win on the margins, as he should. And he's just not going to go out there and try to blow guys away. He may have overspent a little bit to get Gary Sánchez, but he's okay overspending here and there. He doesn't want to be somebody who sets a precedent that, hey, come to Baltimore to get paid. He wants to make sure that guys are not getting ridiculously overpaid and that he gets taken advantage of by agents.
And Elias' whole thing is also, I want to win this year.
Yeah.
But he also is always thinking about the future.
Right.
I want to win this year and next year and the year after. So he may be less willing to make a move if that takes away from next season.
Right. So just an interesting start to the offseason. I think I've just seen a lot of comments on social media about whether it's been a disappointing offseason so far. And I just want to say, give it some time.
Yeah, you can't judge yet.
We can't judge the offseason until we get to spring training, and maybe not even then, because moves happen during spring training, like the Danny Coulomb trade that ended up being very impactful for this team. So a lot left for the Orioles to do, but there's a lot left for every team in Major League Baseball to do right now. And that's the reason that you still see Corbin Burns and Anthony Santander and Max Fried and all these guys still out there in free agency. Hopefully we get some kind of movement, though, Danielle, that we can talk about, because we will go live once again on the Banner Baseball Show once we have some kind of conversation to talk about. $765 million. $805 million is how much Juan Soto's contract can go up to. That's absurd.
Yeah, I don't even know what to do with that kind of money.
What would you do with that kind of money? You can get a fly to France, get a pastry chef?
No, buy an island.
Buy an island? I was wondering about that, though, because how do you get running water onto this island?
Pay people to do that.
So do you get
have
like
$800 million? I think you can afford it.
Yeah. Do you get like a water filtration plant?
Maybe I buy an island that's already up and running.
Okay.
Yeah.
Not one that's just like totally.
Oh, I don't want to start from scratch. It's
No.
like a lot of work. Yeah.
I mean, you gotta figure out the logistics of that, or just pay a bunch of people to figure out the logistics of that.
The second one.
Yeah. I can't wait to visit Juan Soto Island. Thanks so much for tuning in. We have complete coverage here from Dallas on the BaltimoreBanner.com, where you can subscribe $1 for 6 months. Danielle wrote a great piece reacting to what Elias said yesterday. We'll hear from him again today. We'll also hear from him tomorrow. We'll have the Rule 5 draft in the meantime. And then we are going to come back to Baltimore, and hopefully we'll have some kind of press conferences for Tyler O'Neill and Gary Sánchez, because neither of those deals are official, but we will react to those as well. For Danielle Allentuck, I'm Paul Mancano. Thanks so much for tuning in. Like, rate, review, subscribe, all that good stuff.